Today, 48 members of the Secretary General's Circle of Leadership on the Prevention of and Response to Sexual Exploitation and Abuse in the United Nations operations and 21 UN entities have joined him in issuing a collective statement to reaffirm their continued personal commitment as global leaders to support efforts to combat sexual exploitation and abuse across the UN system. In the statement, they recognize the unique responsibility of the UN to set standards for preventing, responding to, and eradicating sexual exploitation and abuse, addressing its impact effectively and humanely, and safeguard and empower victims, as well as the shared responsibility of the UN and its member states to protect victims and whistleblowers and to take appropriate actions against perpetrators. They reaffirm their commitment to make zero tolerance of sexual exploitation and abuse a reality, stating that this is an urgent and moral imperative, as well as an operational necessity to ensure effectiveness and credibility of the United Nations around the world. The full statement will soon be issued as a note to correspondent. It will include the members of the Circle of Leadership and the UN entities which have endorsed the statement. The Secretary General this morning spoke at the 42nd annual meeting of the foreign ministers of the Group of 77, and he noted that by its very essence, the G77 has been a champion of multilateralism. He said that we have taken very seriously the G77 and China's priorities for the year that live up to the ambitions of the 2030 Agenda. The United Nations, he said, is moving full steam ahead to better implement the mandates and serve people while ensuring greater responsibility and greater transparency, accountability, and effectiveness. In the next months, the Secretary General will submit new proposals to improve the UN's human resources policies and increase gender and geographical diversity within the Secretariat. This afternoon, he will speak at a ministerial meeting on the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine. He will note the fact that UNRWA's schools remain open with other key operations continue is a tribute to all those who have stepped up to provide additional resources when UNRWA was plunged into an unanticipated and deeply unfortunate funding crisis. Unfortunately, he is to add that these exceptional efforts, $260 million in new funding, are still not enough to see UNRWA through the end of the year. With a remaining gap of about $186 million, UNRWA's operations are still at risk. And at 2:15 today in this room, UNRWA Commissioner General Pierre Kranbuhl and Foreign Minister Ayman Safadi of Jordan will brief you on the UNRWA situation. And this morning, the Deputy Secretary General spoke at the 2018 EU-UN Spotlight Initiative high-level event for the launch of the Latin American Regional Program, which is entitled Working in Partnership with Latin American Countries to Stop Femicide. She said the initiative reaffirms the UN and the European Union's joint commitment to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls by 2030 and by placing gender equality at the center of our efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. When a woman or girl is killed just because of her gender, it reflects social norms and attitudes rooted in inequality and power imbalances between women and men. She said and stressed the need to end impunity for the perpetrators. At 12:45 p.m., the Deputy Secretary General and the European Commissioner for International Cooperation and Development, Neven Mimica, will be at the stakeout area on the third floor to answer any questions about the initiative. And as you will see this morning, the Security Council held a ministerial-level meeting on non-proliferation of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The meeting was chaired by the U.S. Secretary of State, Mr. Mike Pompeo. And the envoys of the Middle East Quartet from the Russian Federation, the United States, the European Union, and the United Nations met yesterday on the margins of the UN General Assembly to discuss the prospects for peace negotiations and situation on the ground, particularly in Gaza. The envoys expressed their deep concern over the continued escalation in Gaza. The Mideast envoy expressed support for the UN's efforts to prevent further escalation, empower the legitimate Palestinian authorities in Gaza, and address all humanitarian needs, including through the Ad Hoc Liaison Committee. And yesterday afternoon, the Secretary General joined the UNESCO Director General, Audrey Azoulay, at a high-level meeting on the power of education in countering racism and discrimination, the case for anti-Semitism. He said that anti-Semitism does not stand alone and that anti-Semitism is not a problem for the Jewish community alone. Where there is anti-Semitism, there are likely to be other discriminatory ideologies in form of biases, feeding each other in a cauldron of contempt, the Secretary General told the audience. Anti-Semitism has evolved, grown more complex, and adopted new guises, he went on to say, and it is now abetted by public discourse that stigmatizes minorities, refugees, and foreigners. Education, the Secretary General said, is one of the most powerful tools we have. The UN, including UNESCO, is leading important work to prevent anti-Semitism, discrimination, including through Holocaust education guidelines for educators and policymakers. The speech was put out online. And for the first time so I'll just keep going with some of the events. Yesterday afternoon, the Secretary General spoke at the high-level meeting on Mali and the Sahel. On Mali, he said any delay on the pact for peace would compound security challenges and threaten the path to stability. And he also stressed the importance of national ownership in this process, one that brings together voices of a broad spectrum of Malian society, including, above all, women. And on the wider Sahel region, he called the G5 Sahel Joint Force an important demonstration of regional ownership and said it needed a strong mandate as well as sustained and predictable funding. And for the first time in several years, the UN has been able to deliver humanitarian aid to Togolese village in South Darfur's eastern Jebel Mar area, following the announcement on this September 20th of a 3-month unilateral ceasefire by the Sudan Liberation Army Abdul Wahid faction. Following an assessment mission last week, a UN team made up of humanitarian partners, peacekeepers, delivered initial assistance, including essential household, water and sanitation supplies, as well as mosquito nets, to some 360 landslide-affected people in the village of Togolese, where heavy rains caused a landslide early in September. Our colleagues at the Office for Humanitarian Affairs is remaining in touch with the peacekeeping mission and the government authorities for additional humanitarian assistance. Tomorrow, the Deputy Secretary General will host a meeting on the margins of the General Assembly to build support for transition from peacekeeping to peace-building and development in Darfur. And over the past few days, while we were not briefing, the UN received 4 full payments for the regular budget from El Salvador, Guinea-Bissau, Malaysia, and Mali, thanking all of them, which brings our number up to 141. Press encounters besides the UNRWA here at 2:15 and the Deputy Secretary General 12:45. At 6 p.m., around 6, there'll be a press encounter with Faustin Archange Touadéra, the President of Central African Republic, along with Parfait Onanga Nyanga, the head of the UN mission in the Central African Republic, Ismail Chergui, the Commissioner for Peace and Security at the African Union, and Jean-Pierre Lacroix, the head of the UN peacekeeping operations. They will brief you at the GA stakeout on the 3rd floor following the high-level ministerial meeting on the Central African Republic. Then at 6:30 p.m., there'll be a briefing in this room by Takeshi Osuga, the spokesperson for the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister of Japan. Questions? Excellent. Oh, sorry? The flag is down for the passing of... I'm sorry, I'm completely blanking out. I know the answer, and I will squawk it and say it to you. But there's a very good and legitimate reason for why the flag is at half-staff.